I'm joined today by Milo Yiannopoulos, who is an associate editor at Breitbart. The reason that Milo is here is to follow up on what I guess yesterday marked the start of our coverage of Gamergate, and to quickly get people up to speed as to where we are now, at least from the purposes of our show. Gamergate is this online movement, for lack of a better term. There are those who believe that Gamergate is a kind of a consumer movement against what some see as fraud, nepotism, cronyism within the video game industry. There are others who see Gamergate as a misogynistic and sometimes even racist or xenophobic movement designed to keep whether it's women or minorities or other groups out of the video game world. Yesterday, I interviewed Brianna Wu, who is a video game developer. She made a very specific allegation about an interview with Milo that did not happen, and Milo is here to address that. So Milo, let's start at the beginning. How did you first get involved with Gamergate?
Well, I wasn't previously a gamer. In fact, I'd said some relatively disobliging things about gamers in the past. But I kind of got sucked into this issue because I saw, if you like, a marginalized community, the gaming community, being accused of some things that it obviously had not done. And having its art form, having its hobby trashed by people who were obviously in it for ulterior motives. And I guess it raised my journalistic hackles, if you like. Because I sort of saw this injustice, if you want to put it like that, going on, and thought I'll take a look into this. And as time has gone by, I've become, I guess, the sort of default reporter for all this.
Okay, and is your position that you are a pro or anti on this issue, or do you see yourself? I know that you wrote in the blog post about your interview with Brianna Wu, which didn't happen. You wrote, "I am a reporter and not a member of the movement, and thus I am well placed to bridge the divide between the pro and the anti side." Do you still stand by that that's your position within Gamergate?
Absolutely, and I think it's perfectly fair. And you can see that not only from the interactions that I have on both sides with people, but also people have been doing these incredible maps of the Gamergate universe. They do this great number crunching and data analysis of the tweets, and you'll see that there are a few of us, people who are able to speak to both sides of this debate, slap bang in the middle of this great sort of connections map. People like Christina Hoff Sommers from the American Enterprise Institute and me are right in the middle, geographically speaking, of both groups. Although it's absolutely true that, yes, I'm very sympathetic to the Gamergate side of all of this. I'm just a reporter covering the story.
So let's explore that, just in the interest of full disclosure for my audience that's not necessarily keyed in to the minutia of what's going on here. There are some quotes of yours that I'd like to read back to you and get your reaction to those in terms of where they place you kind of on this spectrum. You wrote, quote, "Because an army of sociopathic feminist programmers and campaigners, abetted by achingly politically correct American tech bloggers, are terrorizing the entire community, lying, bullying, and manipulating their way around the internet for profit and attention." As an outsider to this, when I read that, it seems to me very one-sided. It seems very kind of anti-feminist and bordering on patronizing of so-called feminists.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong intrinsically with being anti-feminist if you mean specifically by that you have no patience for the sort of shrieking misandrists that represent the modern feminist movement. I think that any normal person would, and I include myself in this, call themselves an equality feminist, call themselves an equity feminist, believe firmly and passionately that men and women are completely equal, as I believe that gays and straights are completely equal as a gay man. I don't believe in discrimination against anybody, but too much of modern feminism, I think, is characterized by man-hating.
Okay.
Given that specific caveat, I'm perfectly happy to say I'm anti-feminist. And it's in that context that paragraph was written, which I think you'd understand from the piece. So I'm perfectly happy to stand by that with that understanding of feminism.
Okay, one more quote. And again, this is just all kind of setting the context for looking at the claims around the interview. I think this is important. You wrote, "We're all used to feeling a niggling suspicion that, quote, death threats, unquote, sent to female agitators aren't all they're cracked up to be. And indeed, there is no evidence that any violent threat against a prominent female figure in the media or technology industry has ever been credible. That is to say, that any feminist campaigner on the receiving end of internet trolling has ever been in any real danger." I found that comment. Well, first of all, do you still stand by that? I guess there's no point in talking about it if you've no longer stood by that.
there's a factual claim in there, which is that none of these threats has ever come to anything. That is true. It's a perfectly true factual claim. None of these threats has ever come to anything. There's a factual claim in there. There's no evidence that any of these women was ever in any real danger. I think that's perfectly fair. The thing that you will probably be objecting to is the tone of this that seems to be dismissing what are in some cases very ugly, violent, unpleasant threats against women.
Well, it's not so much the tone per se, but it's, we're talking really in shades of gray here, right? And for example, yesterday, after I asked Brianna Wu, why did you decide to publicize the threats you received? I was accused of victim blaming in some way. Now, I rejected that completely in the sense that I asked that question out of sheer personal curiosity. When I receive threats, authorities have told me, don't publicize these. It's kind of feeding the trolls in a way. It can invite copycats. So I think we're dealing in a gray area. Do you think, though, that by writing off some of the claims, you are, in a sense, victim blaming?
No, absolutely not. What I think I'm doing is drawing attention to the fact that the closer you look into the claims made by some of these feminist campaigners, the less they stand up to scrutiny. I mean, one by one, the feminist campaigners around whom the Gamergate controversy centers are having more and more questions raised about their reputations. And that's not as a result of some sort of intrusive, misogynistic campaign into their backgrounds to try and dig dirt up about them. It's as a result of the fact that many of them are trolls and bullies and are getting a taste of their own medicine. And that sounds like a very harsh thing to say. And I should put a caveat in here too, say nobody endorses rape threats, death threats, or any kind of bullying or intimidation on the internet.
When you say nobody, of course you mean other than the people doing them. I'm guessing those people are okay with them.
Well, who knows? It depends who's actually doing it, which we don't know. Because there's not a single case anywhere in Gamergate has there been a prosecution made, so we don't know yet. But the fact is that no normal person is going to say that any of these threats are acceptable. The people responsible should be caught, should be arrested, should be imprisoned for them. But when you look into some of the people who claim to have received these threats, and you see decade-long patterns of dishonesty, this tells me as a reporter that we need to treat some of their claims with a little bit more skepticism and a little bit more journalistic rigor. And we shouldn't simply credulously repeat the claims that they make, which have in the past, almost without exception, been proven to either be false or to be misrepresentations. Now, as a responsible reporter, when I see that in somebody's biography, or I see that in somebody's history, however that information comes to me, I have a responsibility to treat that person's claims with a greater degree of scrutiny than I would have if they were just some ordinary person I'd never heard of before. That's just a fact. That's just a reality of reporting. And, these feminists, one of these feminists claimed to have stabbed somebody in the face and killed them and not reported it to the police. I mean, this stuff beggars belief in some cases.
Who's that specifically that made that claim?
Well, I can tell you that a photographer who worked with Zoe Quinn has made this claim very publicly at the risk of at great risk to her own professional reputation if that turns out to be a lie. I have no reason to imagine that it is a lie. I've spoken to her, I've spoken to other people involved in that. It's difficult to find the truth of it. But these sorts of claims float around these individuals and have done in some cases for decades. Brianna Wu, I'm currently investigating an allegation that she had a restraining order taken out on her. We know that she's created memes and trolled the Gamergate community. We know that she's created sock puppets making jokes about having erections at deaths. I mean, she sort of admitted on your show yesterday that she'd made this Bro Lol's Twitter account. What you didn't do is read out some of the contents of that, which include tweets like, I get an erection at the death scene in Tomb Raider, but that doesn't make me a misogynist. The sort of twisted, damaged psychology it takes to come up with this stuff.
Okay, so I think to kind of sum up the context, though, I think it would be fair to say that I guess you were not in any way overstating your position at the beginning when you said, while you consider yourself a reporter on this, you're certainly very sympathetic to one side. We can agree on that.
And I'm mostly sympathetic because these continual claims, some of which are going to end up not panning out, not being true, that are uncritically reported by newspapers as grand as the New York Times, are detracting attention from the real story here, which is a concerted effort to reclaim some quality and independence and standards in video games journalism. And every time Gamergate makes some headway in this, another one of these manufactured scandals emerges and completely suffocates all of the oxygen out of the room and leaves no space to discuss the really serious issues, which are AAA game developers paying for positive coverage.
No question. And that's something we will be covering in the future. But for the purposes of our interview here, let's see if we can clear up what are now two drastically different explanations for what happened in the interview that was set to take place between you and Brianna Wu. In your blog post, which I've reviewed in detail several times, to summarize, and I'll give you an opportunity to kind of get more specific.
Sure.
After you believed that an interview was scheduled with Brianna Wu, you were unable to get a hold of her. Your attempts to get a hold of her for the interview failed, and eventually she said that this was moving too fast and that while she was willing to do the interview, it wasn't going to happen on that particular day. That's your story, correct?
I wouldn't characterize it like that. I think what actually happened specifically was that she began to ignore messages from my producer, from my tech guy, and from me on platforms that she was otherwise communicating with other people on. She was tweeting regularly, but ignoring our DMs. She was emailing other people, but ignoring our emails. And this happened immediately after I sent her a list of questions that she initially said 7 of them were fine. Then she started to get cold feet. You and I have been in this business a long time. We know what happens when interviewees are starting to get cold feet. They start to stall. The language becomes more vague. They start, they're reluctant to make commitments about time, and then eventually they drop off the radar.
It's happened to me many times, no question about it. So I got the list of questions from you along with Brianna Wu's comments, and as assuming that this has not been doctored in any way, which I have no reason to believe that it has been, I want to make that clear, she was indeed fine or found the questions fair, to use the language that she used, with the exception of about 5 or 7 questions, as you said. Now, Brianna's claim on my program yesterday was as follows, quote, "What happened was he, Milo, was frankly beyond rude to me when we were trying to plan this thing. Rudeness is certainly subjective, so I don't know that there's much of an analysis to do there. So let me finish the quote, and then you can respond to what you find most important." She goes on, "I want to remind your viewers, I was on the run from my house. I had no internet. I was going to a television station to do MSNBC and CNN, which frankly trumps his show," referring to Milo's show. "And then I was trying to get to a safe location. I had my phone, but I was literally driving to a place that was secure to go do his show." She went on to say, "I'm also frankly in trauma because of everything that's happened to me. And what you saw here was frankly a childish reaction from someone that didn't understand. I was literally driving to a hotel to get Wi-Fi set up to do his show, and then he just blew up online and was frankly a jerk about it." Let's go piece by piece, Milo.
Sure. This is a very convenient fiction.
I know you don't agree that it's true, but if you allow me to kind of walk us through the pieces of it, maybe we can figure this out. Did she communicate to you that she was looking for a place to get Wi-Fi and intended on doing the interview on that day, as she claims?
No, she didn't.
Okay. Did any attempts from you or your producer around the time that the interview was scheduled to take place, were any of those responded to?
No, they weren't.
Was there any contact after the window for the interview had elapsed with an explanation from Brianna as to why the interview didn't happen?
No. And public and private DMs and emails continued to go unanswered while she was responding to other people and appearing on other TV shows.
Okay, so, I mean, if speculate, what do you think happened here?
I think it's very obvious what happened. She thought that this would be a good mechanism to publicize herself and her experiences and what she feels to be an important issue in the gaming industry. She used the threat which she says was made against her as a way of propelling those views into the mainstream. She thought that my show would provide her with a platform from which to appear as though she were open to discussion. When she realized that I would actually be a journalist rather than giving her an easy ride, she got cold feet and she pulled out. Except she didn't have the professionalism and the courtesy to let me know that was happening. She instead strung us along, gave my producer messages saying, "Oh, well, it might happen later, it might happen later. Oh, well, it probably won't happen today." Despite the fact that I had informed her that it was of the deadline. She'd agreed to the deadline. I had given her every opportunity to vet the questions in advance, which I never normally do, which you will know is highly irregular journalistic practice. Which
I've never done it. Yeah, I've never done it.
Of course. I mean, I've done it once or twice, perhaps ever, as an expression of good faith, because I wanted her to come on the show and I wanted to show that I was open to to discussion. I was happy even to censor my own questions, despite the fact that I knew that some important things in there would end up not being asked that I knew that my audience would want to hear about. I told her that if she bombed out, that it would cost us $500-600 in production costs for that episode. I told her about the deadline. I told her all of these things, and she agreed to all these terms. Then suddenly she goes quiet, despite appearing on other shows, despite tweeting her precise location to the nearest 5 meters at a comic conference at a time when she claims she was in fear of her life, which sounds very suspicious to me. I mean, you can take a view as to whether she was acting in good faith or she's responding to you honestly when she says that, yes, although most people are advised by law enforcement not to contact the press when they have serious threats, that A, as she claimed on Twitter today, she was never informed by law enforcement not to publicize these threats, which I don't believe for a second. And B, that she thought that her grand mission of bringing attention to the terrible plight of women in the gaming industry trumped that piece of advice or trumped that instinct, which I don't believe either. I think what happened here is very obvious. She realized she wasn't going to get an easy ride, and she backed out. Unfortunately, I was in a situation where I had no time to book another guest. It had cost me money. My whole show was down the pan. So I recorded a message very, very plainly, and I mean, you give me your opinion about it, but I thought very fairly, simply reading out the facts as to what had happened and moved on. I was prepared to leave the situation there until she went on air with you and lied about me and said that I was dishonest and that I was childish, at which point I felt compelled to respond. But,
well, to be clear, so that the audience understands, the reason Milo is here in this format is because there were specific claims made yesterday by Brianna. There's one last thing, and we're so out of time, but I feel like one more minute is worth it to get this question in. You know, one of the claims of one side of the Gamergate movement, as you know, and it's not the side that you sympathize with, is that there is some combination of misogyny and or homophobia and or racism within video gaming. And you mentioned being a gay man yourself. One of the issues I've been covering for many years, and I find it to be a serious issue, is that of discrimination within the LGBT community, and specifically that of transphobia from gay men and lesbian women. And in researching for this, I came across a September 16th column for Breitbart London, where you published a piece about Chelsea Manning, referring to Chelsea Manning as a traitorous transsexual and asking if the government had cut it off yet, referring to Chelsea Manning's penis. This is pretty disturbing stuff to me, separate from Gamergate, right? Totally separate from Gamergate. But I would be remiss not to bring this up. Is that something you stand by?
Well, I think you have to understand that in the context of a much longer piece that I wrote, which explained that I don't think transition surgery is remotely the right approach for transsexualism. Transsexualism is a psychiatric disorder. It's not something that can be responded to with cosmetic surgery, which is what happens now. We need to reassess it and approach it with drugs and therapy. Now, context of that column was a provocative, Mickey-taking column about somebody who is a convicted traitor. Some of the language used in it was very salty and fruity. If you're the kind of person that gets upset by words, if you're the kind of person that listens to 10 minutes of a Joan Rivers set and wants to smash your television, it's not the kind of thing you're going to like. That's perfectly fine.
But hold on a second. So to be clear, Milo, I want to make sure we have you on record accurately here. When you reference Joan Rivers, are you saying that this was a satirical piece?
Well, I'm saying that I'm using the same sort of approach to comedy to ridicule people who deserve to be taken down a peg or two, using the same kinds of devices that she uses. Yes, absolutely, I'm saying that.
Okay, because it didn't read, to me, in my opinion, it didn't read like a satire piece. Last thing I want to say about this, you mentioned transsexualism being a mental disorder. The fact that there is something called gender identity disorder, which is diagnosed, so to speak, in some individuals who feel that their physical gender does not match the gender they feel they are, that's different than saying this is equivalent to psychopathy, for example. So I think that you're treading on dangerous ground. We may just disagree on this, right?
The sorts of diseases that it's closer to are things like, there are patients at Johns Hopkins, which is the university hospital that pioneered transition surgery. They have a a ward which deals with a lot of these sort of related conditions. There are patients who believe that their arms don't belong to them. They wake up one day and they think their arm is no longer part of their own body. There are patients who believe that they are dead, that they wake up and they're clinically dead. The basis of my argument is that what we don't do is warp reality to conform to those delusions. With those kinds of disorders, we give people therapy and drugs to help them reconcile reality with their minds. That's a very commonly accepted treatment path for those sorts of disorder. My contention is that transgenderism falls into that category of disorder.
Okay, and to be clear, this is just an assertion that you're making.
Well, it's based on reading the science. It's based on reading the science from Johns Hopkins, which is the first university to really pioneer transition surgery, which no longer performs that surgery because it has a sufficient body of patients to know that most of these people very tragically kill themselves with or without the surgery, and there's some reason to suppose that people who have the surgery are even more likely to kill themselves. It's a treatment plan that doesn't work. And it's something that's become a holy cow because transgender people have been bracketed in with gays and lesbians as part of the sort of LGBT civil rights bloc. So we now wrongly consider transgenderism to be just the next civil rights frontier. I don't believe it has anything in common with gays and lesbians whatsoever. I understand that some people will find that offensive.
Well, in the same way that many people would find it, there's many people who disagree that the issue of gay and lesbian rights has anything at all to do with the struggle for African American rights in this country, and there are people who disagree. So people are on a spectrum on this, no question about it. I have
sympathy with that view too. I don't think those people are entirely wrong. I think it's a debate that we ought to have, but that for various reasons we're not really allowed to.
All right, so listen, Milo, we're totally out of time. I hope that you feel I've been fair to you. I did my research. I've asked the questions that I think needed to be asked. And do you feel you've been allowed to give your views?
Yeah, I don't think Gamergate would be particularly desperate to know my views on transgenderism, but otherwise I think we had a great interview.
Okay, thanks for being on. We've been speaking with Milo Yiannopoulos, Associate Editor at Breitbart. Thanks again.
Thanks.